Paleontologist. And some of you might remember me from my talk about dinosaurs last Wednesday. Tonight you have the treat of actually having somebody who knows about dinosaurs. Talk about them, so it'll be more informative, and maybe even marginally informative at all, as opposed to what I talked about dinosaurs. So, we're going to give a little bit of extra time. I know we said we'd start at 5:30, but the parking situation, as I'm sure many of you have seen, is unusually difficult tonight because of scheduling contingencies that were not apparent when we set up this event. So, we're going to give 5 minutes for people to straggle in, but right now what I'd like to do is say that the University of Oregon has a program in place to help support everyone being able to hear in lectures. So, not only are we going to be using the microphone, have the speakers in the system, but anyone who has a need can get additional hearing assistance device. So we have enough in the museum that if anyone has a need for an additional hearing assistance device, we can get you one to use during the lecture today. So please, if you do, let me know, and we can get you set up with that during the 5 minutes here while we wait for people to come in. Thanks.
The hard part is getting people to
I don't know if it's your story.
Well, yeah, probably
I didn't see
part
it.
of both. The problem is
Ruth? You know Ruth started?
yes. Ruth
isn't staying for the event.
Maya was excited.
Ruth is not staying.
So much what they thought. Yes.
Yeah, I talked to John last week, and he was in the jail line for the field trip, so I know he
But she was happy to get it. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Hey Pat, I'm glad you came out today.
Oh yeah, no, I can do this. Talk about trauma. This goes back to college and the fact that I had a real I was really so you were sat back? Yeah. Hopefully we didn't see. Maybe if you sat closer. No. It was just you a partnership. No. I don't even have a good story about it. I think it was just that age where, you need more sleep. And I was getting up early in the morning and stuff. And I
Happy birthday. Thank you. You want to slide in here? Is Nick here yet? Not yet. Okay. I thought I was going to be like super late, but... Well, they delayed. Sorry, this is like this one. They delayed because of the parking spot. So they figured there's probably still more people. I really like your sweater. Thank you. It's an old one. It's really nice. I was actually looking at a pattern for one like that recently, but... He might be trying to hurt too. No, he just had a time, but he was having a beer and I might have to jump out during the talk to go check in on lunch. Maybe. Is it getting streamed at the same time? Yeah, it's streaming right now, actually, because I thought we were starting. I'm going to go check on it now, just to see how the sound is. Or maybe out of the bar, or somebody to her. Oh, wow.
All right, everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll repeat my offer in case anyone came in. We do have assisted listening devices for anyone who wants it. If you do need one, please let Liz or me know, and we can get you set up. We want to promote next Thursday's event. Next Thursday, the 21st, will be our first Museum After Hours event featuring the live music of Ray Troll and the Ratfish Wranglers. You can play live in this space. Yeah, in this space. Tickets are $15 for museum members and $20 for non-members, and include 2 adult beverages and pizza from Falling Sky.
That's a steal.
Yeah, it is. That's a really great deal. You can buy them tonight. You can buy those tickets tonight at the front desk, or you can go online at the website and buy your tickets ahead of time. We will have tickets for sale at the door, but there's limited space available because of the constraints of the space. So it's possible if you wait to buy them at the door, you may not be able to attend. If you aren't familiar, Ray Troll is the artist who painted the mural behind our giant salmon, and his assistant worked with him to paint the mural behind our giant sloth. So Ray is also famous for his t-shirt designs, which include many different interesting extinct animals, often with a Northwest theme. He's based out of Alaska. Thank you. So tonight we're glad to be able to welcome Dr. Julia Clarke, who's a professor in vertebrate paleontology in the Jackson School of Geosciences at the University of Texas in Austin. She has her PhD from the Department of Geology and Geophysics at Yale University and her bachelor's in comparative literature and geobiology from Brown University. Dr. Clarke studies birds and other theropod dinosaurs to better understand major transitions in the history of life. She is particularly interested in how structures in living animals developed and how novel ways of moving, such as avian flight and wing-propelled diving, evolved. She currently serves as co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Anatomy and is associate editor of Paleobiology. If you remember from last week, the more general the name of the journal, the more important that journal is. So, trusted, the Journal of Anatomy and Paleobiology are both very important journals. She has published numerous technical papers, including 9 in Nature and Science. And so those are like the epitome. When your journal is called Nature or Science, that's the top. And has been recognized for excellence in research, undergraduate teaching, and outreach. So we're very excited to have her at the museum. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Clarke. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed, and to Liz, who put a lot of this event, if not all of this event, together with Ed. It's such a pleasure to be here with you guys tonight and to be in Eugene. This is my first time in Eugene, and I'm loving it so far. I got time for a little hike today, and it was wonderful. So thank you again for having me. So today I'm going to talk about the secret lives of dinosaurs. And I know you have an exhibit on flying dinosaurs. Don't worry, they come into the story. But I thought I'd open by just introducing myself a little more fully by kind of what do we do in terms of the science behind the story you're going to hear today. So I'm fundamentally a field paleontologist. I work all over the world, discovering new fossils that are relevant to the evolution of dinosaurs, and in particular, one group of dinosaurs, birds. But we think of discovery as a single moment in the field where we discover a new fossil or a new bone that might tell us something transformative. But in fact, my most important discoveries have started with the fossils, but ended up embedded in and in influencing other disciplines of science. So I've done work looking at new ways to make sense of living animal structures, most notably things like the geometry of wing shape and what explains that in living birds. And in the rotating structure in the center of the screen, taken a new look at the bird or living dinosaur vocal organ, so how birds essentially sing. This is not this is not the work of me as an individual, but I believe diverse minds produce the best in science out there. And so my students and the work that I'm going to present today has been the work of a team, and a diverse team. So I do a lot of work globally especially in the southern hemisphere and in Asia, because I think we need to not just understand our own backyards, but consider our global backyards, if you will, and make sense of Earth history by integrating data from all over the world. So that's just a little bit about me. Let's get back to why you're really here. So, when we think about dinosaurs' secret lives, we've actually been speculating about them since the first dinosaur bones were discovered. We imagined our interactions with these creatures, we imagined what they looked like, how they might interact with us in other contexts, how they might have moved, how they might have fed, what they looked like, and even their private passions. We like to think about things that we have in common with dinosaurs, like what they ate, right? But what I'm interested in telling you about today is the science of dinosaurs. And so the science behind what we know about what they looked like, what they ate, and their biology more generally. So how do we ask this question? How does science reveal the secret lives of dinosaurs? Well, fundamentally, we start with the bones. And so for over 150 years, we've been tracking the bony features of dinosaurs from one to another, tracking what those features tell us about the evolutionary relationships of dinosaurs with other living creatures today. And this work in my field, and some of the work I'll present today, also integrates data from another source that's shown here by another Julia that involves dissection and looking at how muscles relate to bone and how we put flesh on creatures that we only know from bone, right? And I also like to call it playing with your food. So I'm going to start with the first question. How can we tell what dinosaurs looked like? Well, we use those bony features that tell us about the relationships among extinct forms and living forms to start asking this question, what are they related to? So when we look at the first images of dinosaurs, like this one, what does this guy look like? Because when we look at these animals, we imagine their biology. It's not just kind of their appearance, but what that appearance might tell us. I mean, are they in gym clothes? Are they going to the opera? I don't know. But in fact, if we look at these early illustrations, we can see that they're most similar to this little dude. And this dude is the tuatara from New Zealand.
What?
A tuatara from New Zealand. But what is this tuatara, and does it relate particularly closely to dinosaurs? Well, in fact, the tuatara is the closest relative of all of our living snakes and lizards. But it's not particularly close to where dinosaurs fall in the tree of life. So it's not a particularly good model. If we look at those shared features that are shared by virtue of genealogy, right, then we wouldn't expect this distant cousin of dinosaurs to look particularly similar to most of our dinosaurs today. So what we need to do is track, using these fundamental bony features, where extinct dinosaurs fall. And we locate them near their closest cousins, crocodilians. And we can look to their living descendants, or their living dinosaurs today, birds. But you can see that the outer body coverings of these two groups are really different, right? One is very scaly, maybe more similar superficially to that tuatara, and one is feathered and has brightly colored and has just eaten a banana in this case. But starting in about the 1990s, we started making new discoveries in northeastern China from ancient lake beds that are very finely bedded. They're filled with sediment that's derived from ancient volcanoes. And in this fine sediment that was rapidly accumulating in deepening lakes, we have a preserved record now of the outer body coverings of many dinosaurs, many extinct forms. So when we break open these pieces of rock, rather like opening the pages of a book, we find dinosaurs like this one that show not scales, but fine filaments that are much more similar in superficial appearance to hair. In the past 25 years, we've now discovered a huge array of these animals with bristles. So shown here, you can see several species with bristles coming off the back of the neck or the tail from all different parts of the dinosaur tree. In fact, we've even found these bristle-like structures on what I like to call pony-sized tyrannosaur relatives. So this is a tyrannosaur that's about the size of a small horse. And we see these bristles along the tail. Even more recently, we've discovered large tyrannosaurs in China that have these bristles. So we know even large tyrannosaurs that were bigger than a pony, just by a little, that have these bristles and filaments. But in the dinosaurs that we track by bony features as closer cousins of living birds, we find branched pinnate feathers. Just like you could find shed by a gull or a pigeon or whatever we have most abundantly here in Eugene. So in these branched feathers, we see them on the tail, on the wings, on the hind limbs, in different groups. But these are branched feathers that have all of the parts of a living bird feather. So if we put this evidence together on a mock-up of the dinosaur tree that's based on all of these thousands of bony features that we looked at, we can see that the blue stars that are shown are filaments that are more superficially similar looking to hair, are common in all different parts of this tree. But in those dinosaurs that are most closely related to birds, we have these branched feathers. Well, you might say, weren't some of those guys scaly? And you'd be right. So we do have evidence that in two groups of dinosaurs, both herbivorous and rather large, that they were mostly skin and scale covered. And those include sauropod dinosaurs. These are shown from an embryo of a sauropod dinosaur from Argentina. And then the famous dinosaur mummies of North America that show this thick, almost elephantine skin with scales on it. So this isn't a simple story where every dinosaur is covered in bristles and filaments. We know that there are dinosaurs like this relative of tyrannosaurs that have skin, scales on the lower part of the body, and bristle structures on the tail. But all of these data have fundamentally revised how we look at and reconstruct these dinosaurs. And I think it changes how we think about their biology, right? So what we have is a vision of dinosaurs with more diverse body coverings, including those that seem to us as mammals more similar to mammals like us. These are independently derived structures that are actually chemically closer to a scale. They're made out of beta keratin rather than alpha keratin. So if we look across the tree of dinosaurs, we can see, for example, shown in the symbology that's up there near the top, that's when we have records of different filaments and scales. And then when we get closer to the origin of flight, then we see these branched feather structures. Well, I know that Jurassic Park has resisted incorporating these data into any of their recent movies. But I think that actually this is an exciting time because our vision of dinosaurs and what they look like has fundamentally changed. What we imagine their body coverings to be. I think it's a time for celebration. I think these animals are beautiful and no less scary. So I've shown dinosaurs in a variety of color patterns in these different illustrations, and those reconstructions were based on the imagination of paleo artists. So while we had data to inform the structures that were covering these bodies of these dinosaurs, it was only more recently that we approached another question. A question that was, in fact, thought to be unanswerable. What color was your dinosaur? Well, in our imagination, dinosaurs can be whatever colors we want them to be. But dinosaurs were real animals. So we can imagine all of our toy kits of different dinosaurs. They could be purple and green and spotted. But how would we figure out the color of an extinct dinosaur? How do we think we understand something about some little part of dinosaur coloration? Well, just like when we wanted to look at the closest relatives of dinosaurs to look at what their potential body coverings might be. Are they scaly? Are they skin covered? Are they feather covered? Well, we're going to look to living animals to ask how are they colored. The majority of land-dwelling vertebrates are colored by one pigment. That is melanin. Well, melanin has many forms. There are many chemically distinct forms of melanin. Melanin is what colors our hair. So when we look to terrestrial vertebrates, this is the most common pigment type. So all of the red, brown, and gray colors, even as disparate animals as that lion and these birds, those are melanin-based colors. Well, we learned more things about melanin-based color more recently. So if we look at living birds today, and you could do this experiment if you had a scanning electron microscope in your closet, you could take the feather of a bird, you could take the reddish-brown feather, you could look at it at very high magnification, and in that feather, when you cut it open, you would see melanin packed into pigment packages. These are called melanosomes. And in the red feathers, they would be roundish. And in the black feathers, they would be elongate and a little more sausage-shaped. And in the white feathers, you wouldn't find them at all. You might find some texturing in the beta-keratin that makes up the outside of the feather, but you wouldn't find those pigment packages. Well, it was a colleague of mine who was a young grad student at Yale, and Derek Briggs, who was a professor at Yale, who first made the discovery that there were fossilized pigment packages, or structures that were identical in shape and form, and showing the same patterns as we see in living feathers in this fossil feather from the Cretaceous of Brazil. And specifically what they found, they were motivated by something completely different, as often happens in science. This then student, Jakob Vintner, was looking at squid ink. So when you eat squid ink pasta, and if you were to take that squid ink and you were to put it in your SEM that you got out of your closet, you would see tiny granules called melanin granules. They're the same melanin pigment, well, rather a slightly chemically distinct form, but they're packed into little round balls, even in squid ink. But what these guys motivated, they said, wow, I found this in a fossil squid. I can look in the ink sac of a fossil squid and I can find those little melanin granules, the same as I see in living squid ink. Well, they said, well, let's look at a feather. And they found in the black portion of the striped feather structures that were identical in shape and form to the melanosomes, or the elongate sausage-like melanosomes associated with black color. And in the white portions of the feather, they found no such structures at all. You might say, well, why would the shape of these structures relate to the colors they produce? Why would that be that these packages relate to the colors they produce? Well, in fact, there's a bunch of that's still under study. But there was a kind of seminal piece of work that was done in 2005, actually assaying the chemical content of the melanin pigment in these packages. And this was done in hair, not feathers, but the same pattern is seen in feathers. So in red hair and reddish-brown feathers, the pigment packages are the circular shape. And they found a higher degree or greater amount of the pigment pheomelanin, which is one form of pigment, than in the longer kind of sausage-shaped melanosomes. They found a chemically distinct form called eumelanin. We actually now know that that these melanosomes have a core of pheomelanin and are surrounded by eumelanin. But that's why we think the shape of these structures relates to the chemistry of the melanin, which produces different colors. So right after that, I joined the team because I'm a bird origins person, and we went to China and found this fossil. Doesn't look like a whole heck of a lot, but it was not treated with glue and was lying in a museum drawers wrapped in newspaper. And what we found when we sampled and looked in the scanning electron microscope at these structures, we found impressions that were the same shape and size as living bird melanosomes. And some of them were round, and in other parts around the skull, they were long and skinny. We did this for about 70 samples all over the body of this feathered dinosaur, this is a close relative of birds, and found and measured the most complete of these impressions and structures that were observed all over the body. So we took samples in feathers of different types and along different parts of the feathers in the slab and counter slab of this fossil. So we now had measurements from all over the body of this dinosaur. So what we did is join forces with now close collaborators of mine, Matt Shockey and Liliana Dialba, who had been doing these similar work on living birds. And what they had been doing was saying, cutting open all these red and brown and gray and black feathers, and looking at the shape of melanosomes that produced those colors, that were in those feathers. And what they found was that they could correctly classify the color of a living bird feather more than 85% of the time, based solely on the shape of the structures in the feathers. So we used that data set to predict the colors from the samples in the extinct dinosaur and came up with the first color map of an extinct dinosaur. And the artist did a beautiful job because we still collaborate with artists. That's why I was so excited that Ray Troll was going to be here this week because he just does awesome stuff. But what we did here was stay very close to the data. And what we saw data for was that this guy has cowboy ruffs. He's got these broad white patches down the legs and on the wing. And then around the face, we see it was the only part of the dinosaur that we saw round melanosomes, consistent with a reddish-brown color. What we don't know is precisely the tone of that reddish-brown color. We don't know that. We think we're actually getting closer, because now we've actually related the spectra signature, the precise description of color, not just a color class, to melanosome characteristics in living birds. But over the body, you see a predominantly gray color, which is created by mixes of shorter melanosomes, kind of in living birds, closer to that mammal melanosome with eumelanin in it. But what we know about what these color patterns tell us, it's not just a gee whiz. This actually gets at an aspect of dinosaur biology. So we can look to living dinosaurs and their large color patches. So this is a Upupia epops, fun to say. And what we have is large color patches. This isn't my Upupia epops. He was early in the show. So you bird people out there don't get overly, the Upupia was the one that I showed the color pattern on. But what we see here is large color patches on the wings. And there's been study of these size of color patches in living birds and whether they're used in obscuring the outline of the body or in signaling and in visual communication. So in general, we found that in living birds, large color patches are associated with signaling and visual communication, whereas small color patches are used to obscure the body. Makes intuitive sense in terms of camouflage and blending into a background. Well, we looked at other dinosaurs. So this dinosaur is Microraptor and also a close relative of birds. But what we found in the melanosomes, those little pigment packages of this particular specimen, we found a very different structure, which was extremely long and skinny melanosomes, shown in the red box over to the right, to the left. So in those extremely long, skinny melanosomes, we had only seen in birds, typically fowl, waterfowl, and chicken relatives that have iridescent colors. So Liliana and Matt went back out and they sampled hundreds of other birds that had iridescent color in these groups and other groups of birds. There are multiple ways to create iridescence in living birds, but this particular way is created by stacking these long, skinny melanosomes into arrays that are spaced. And the spacing of those arrays can change the tonality of the iridescence, whether it's more of a red tone or it's more of a blue tone or a green tone. So we found evidence for those long, skinny melanosomes that are uniquely associated with iridescence all over this dinosaur. So this was the earliest known evidence for iridescence in dinosaurs overall, but what we don't know is precisely how bright this iridescence would be. We can't tell exactly whether it was a blue tone or a green tone or a red tone, but we know that the bright reds and the bright greens are very organized arrays with multiple layers. They're very complex. So what we did is reconstructed one of the simplest forms of iridescence. So it's conservative. This guy could have been even brighter. Just this year, he's cute, isn't he? I love this reconstruction. This is the rainbow dinosaur, Saihong, Juji. Saihong, it means rainbow, and my Mandarin isn't that good. But what we found in this dinosaur was a different form of iridescence. So this evidence for it. What we found was stacked over there on the upper row, stacked kind of pancake-shaped or pill-shaped melanosomes that were stacked up. And they were wide and they were pretty big in diameter, not in height. And the only taxa of birds that have this particular kind of broad, flat, platelet-shaped melanosome is in swiftlets, in hummingbirds, and these other birds that create iridescence in a different way. I should note, though, that hummingbirds take it next level. Hummingbirds actually have these platelet-shaped melanosomes, and they have them I like to say they're like a Rice Krispie treat. They have tons of tiny holes in them. They're hollow. So how that relates to the bright colors that we see in hummingbirds, we don't particularly know. But they uniquely have these hollow melanosomes, and we don't find those in the fossil. But in the fossil, we find evidence for black coloration over most of the body with long sausage-shaped melanosomes, but only on the front of the animal and one tiny portion of the butt, of the tail end. We see evidence for these platelet-shaped melanosomes consistent with another form of iridescence. So what does that mean overall about the evolution of color, how that relates to dinosaur biology, how that relates to the evolution of feathers? Well, as soon as we have evidence for feathers, these branched structures in the fossil record, they are patterned. So not just the cases that I showed you in Anchiornis in the first dinosaur and the rainbow dinosaur, evidence for iridescence, but in other dinosaurs we have evidence for stripes, for what's called spangles, where they have a dark tip. So before the evolution of a large-sized wing, you have feathers used in display. In fact, we know that iridescence functions in display in most avian taxa. So this is something else that we can think of as telling us about visual communication, about the importance of visual communication in what we call sexual selection that involves selection on the choice of a mate, defense of a breeding area, those kinds of attributes in dinosaurs before the origin of flight. So we're getting into dinosaur biology by thinking about what they might look like, what they might be wearing. But let's turn to another question that we thought we'd never be able to answer. what could science tell us about what dinosaurs, extinct dinosaurs, sounded like? Well, we're going to use our evolutionary reasoning. We're going to think about those close relatives of extinct dinosaurs yet again. And we're going to look at, refute the dinosaurs of our imagination. So in our imagination, what do dinosaurs sound like? Okay. So what does that sound like to you? Just yell it out. What animal? Lion! You mean something like this? Okay. I've given this talk before. It's always the same answer. So is a lion particularly closely related to dinosaurs? No. In fact, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, right? I mean, the carnivores of our world, they're scary. So it seems quite right we put the voice of a scary mammal into that of an extinct dinosaur. But is there any science behind it? Well, let's look at how Jurassic Park, a subsequent one, tried to answer this question. How did they think science was going to answer this?
I give you the resonating chamber of a velociraptor. Listen to this.
Oh no.
This is brilliant, Billy. Really it is. Sad to say, it's just a little bit late.
A little bit late. So I guess we gotta talk, Jurassic Park, about how animals produce sound. So let's talk about that. So how am I speaking with you today? I'm using modified vocal cords that are in my larynx. Where's your larynx situated? Show me your larynx. There you go. Okay. So basically all land-dwelling vertebrates that make sounds, which is not all vertebrates that live on land, use the larynx to produce sound. Except one group. So if we look at these close cousins of living birds, crocodiles, they use a larynx situated at the end of the windpipe, very much like ours. And they make a variety of sounds using that larynx. If we look at birds, their vocal organ is actually located right next to their heart. So if you were cutting up a bird for some reason and it didn't have the heart removed, you usually are going to get blood all over there. I mean, if you're doing that dissection and you're trying to look at the vocal organ, it's right next to the heart. So you can literally say, in some ways, birds sing from the heart. So sound is actually produced deep in the chest, not like us, where it's produced here. What are we doing? What am I doing when I speak to you? I am producing a sound in my larynx, but the way that I'm actually shaping that sound is by moving all of the muscles in my face, right? I'm shaping that sound with my tongue. I'm shaping that sound by changing the shape of what comes after that sound source. Well, birds have a rigid trachea, and that comes after the sound source that proceeds up along their esophagus, and then the larynx does not produce sound. It has its primitive function, which is to keep food from falling into the airway. That's the first function of a larynx. So if we know these things, we can actually look at the structure of these vocal organs rather like they were printing out in Jurassic Park. What we can do, this is like a steak of an alligator head. And the vocal cords are quite tiny. They're located right on top of the tongue bones that sit at the back of the fleshy tongue. We can generate these structures. So the sounds that are produced are not by a resonating chamber. They're produced in a vocal organ. So we first need to know the properties and the dimensions of the vocal organ if we're going to make our little sound whistle like a velociraptor. If we look at birds, we've got to think about even more degrees of freedom. We have to think about the sound produced deep in the chest, the vocal organs and their property, and then everything that comes after it that could shape that sound. So this is not yet solved, right? Let's talk about what we know and what we don't know, the science behind this story. So if we take a T-Rex, here's a reconstruction of the T-Rex. And we think about the sounds made by close relatives. So let's listen to a couple of them made by crocodilians. That sounds kind of like that growl, right? That lion. What if I told you that sound is produced with the crocodile's mouth closed? Now you've got to envision that roar being made with the mouth closed, not open like a lion. The way that sound is being shaped is with the mouth closed to create, to resonate within that closed mouth of the croc. In fact, a lot of those sound waves actually come out of the sides of the crocodilian's body and go through water that surrounds them in that case. Let's listen to another one, the one that Jurassic Park clip was actually modeled on. Because that second movie, they got the sound a little more on point. Crocodilians make a variety of sounds. And as the closest cousins of dinosaurs make this variety of sounds, and living birds do, we can be pretty sure that most dinosaurs were fairly noisy. But did they do these closed mouth sounds? Both of those sounds were made with the mouth closed. Or did they have a syrinx and sound more like we see in living birds? So let's try to play this clip. Why is it not cooperating? Listen closely. Now. I think that's some heavy breathing by the guy recording the sound, but the deep booming noise was made by an ostrich. The deep boom that you hear, right, is also made with the mouth closed. So in fact, we did a study looking at the frequency of closed mouth behaviors and body size in birds and its presence in crocodiles and other relatives. In fact, there's approximately a 50% probability that dinosaurs were closed mouth vocalizers. So did dinosaurs sound like this? Well, we can basically say no. Because that sound was made with what I like to call the Mercedes-Benz of vocal organs. That sound is produced by a songbird. It's an open mouth sound. And these guys, as I'm going to mention very, very briefly, have a lot of attributes we know were not present in extinct dinosaurs. But let's look to the fossil evidence. So in around 2016, I published the first fossil evidence from the Mesozoic or Age of Dinosaurs of the cartilaginous support for the vocal organ of an extinct bird. So what this showed was that actually the cartilaginous structures could be fossilized in dinosaurs. This was just part of a living bird lineage, so a very recent group. But we could actually say some things from the structure about what was present. For example, we could tell there were two sets of sound sources, one in the right and the left side. We could also tell that was not like, for example, a crocodile shown in the background, right? That's what the same region of a crocodile looks like. So we could say, we did a whole study of living birds to try to make sense of how the soft tissue that produces sound relates to the structures that we could find in the fossil record. So this vocal organ was from a relative of living ducks and geese from Antarctica. And it's sort of like, I'd like to say that it's kind of the Chevy Impala of vocal organs. So in ducks and related taxa, they have two sound sources, but they fire together. Only in certain group of songbirds, most songbirds you find around here, they can fire those two right and left side independently, for example. But it's not the Model T. It's not the version of the earliest syrinx. We don't know what that looks like yet. I'm still hunting for that one. And we don't yet know where in dinosaurs that structure evolves. That's going to be the quest of the next 5 or I'm hoping 5 years. But what can we say? What can we say about extinct dinosaurs? Well, let's wrap it up here. So, we know that the syrinx is only one part of the story. We need to look at respiration. Are these animals breathing continuously or discontinuously, as in crocodiles? We don't know. The other thing that we can speak to, though, is they don't have brains like songbirds today. So, songbirds today, they have a center X, you can see it there in the forebrain, and then a part of the midbrain that's involved in vocal learning and a lot of these complex sound making. Here's the brain of a T-Rex. Okay, this is a classic kind of reptilian or outgroup brain. We have a very small forebrain, most of that is midbrain and parts of the back part. So you can see it better here. This is closer to living birds. You have a tiny forebrain in things like a Velociraptor versus this giant forebrain in a living bird. So did T-Rex sound like this attractive devil? No. We can say that both on body size, the way sound frequency scales with body size. We can say that because this guy has one of the biggest forebrains of all, and if not the Mercedes-Benz of vocal organs, I don't know, the Cadillac or the BMW of whatever. Choose your car reference. So T-Rex didn't say Polly want a cracker. But when did dinosaurs make sounds? Well, what do we know about that? Well, if we turn to the movies, they make a lot of noise when they're about to attack you. But actually, one of the most important contexts that we can say definitively dinosaurs would have produced sound is in a very different context. So, in both crocodiles and birds, basal birds that are precocial, they make sound even within the egg as they're hatching. And communication between the adult and the juvenile in that early stage of post-hatching development is very important. In fact, there's some studies on crocodilians that their hearing is actually tuned to the frequency of the babies. So this is not a trivial context, but a very different one than you see in Jurassic Park. Another context that we know dinosaurs would have had if they when they produced sound, it would be in the context of either defending a territory, which functions in mating, or in attracting mate. So what we call sexual selection context, in communication with other members of their species. So not what they're about to eat, but in a very different context. So if you made Jurassic Park today, it might be a very different movie. If they actually involved science, maybe it'd be the rom-com of the Mesozoic world. In terms of when dinosaurs produce sound, these are the most important contexts in living crocodilians and in birds where sound is produced. It is not produced when they're about to eat a cheeseburger. It is not. There are very, very few cases of vocalization prior to consumption of the prey item. That may be because most vocalizations are produced on the exhale. So try exhaling fully, making a lot of noise, and then eating a cheeseburger. Not recommended. So, to conclude, we've gone from a world of dinosaurs where they looked like this, and they had behaviors that we imagine going with these exteriors, if you will, to a very different world, where we know that close relatives of living birds were highly active, they were signaling and communicating visually, they were most likely were developing more complex ways of communicating orally or acoustically. And it leads to a question that used to be another one of these unanswerable questions. What would happen if dinosaurs didn't go extinct? Well, back when I started in paleontology, there was a paleontologist imagining what dinosaurs might look like if they didn't go extinct. It was Dale Russell, who was at the North Carolina Museum of Natural History when I was there early in my career. And he had this vision, if dinosaurs didn't go extinct, maybe they'd look like the Dinosauroid. A Dinosauroid, I don't know. So the idea idea being that what we saw in these dinosaurs were bigger brain, forward-facing eyes, right? They're bipedal like us. Birds are bipedal like us as well. And they would be these highly intelligent things, maybe vying for world domination. Well, in fact, we know now, right, that dinosaurs didn't go extinct, that they're alive with us as 10,000 species of living birds. So, in fact, we have very good evidence that they're highly intelligent, perhaps seeking world domination. But they don't look anything like us. And so to conclude today, I just want to end with the sense what we increasingly are learning about living animals is that there are intelligences that look nothing like our own. There are intelligences in the way, things that we would recognize, for example, tool use in birds that is more advanced than anything observed in other non-human primates, including chimps. So while we look to close relatives of ourselves and can easily appreciate their intelligence, so often we look at things that look nothing like us and imagine they're really dumb. But just imagine Dale Russell's imaginary world of us vying for world domination with bipedal, highly intelligent organisms that might be taking us on. And try to appreciate when you go back outside later today, all of those other intelligences that are in bodies that look nothing like our own. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for your time, and I'll take any questions.